So, in case you don't remember, I'm Maggie, and this is my presentation, Becoming Like Katniss, How YA Dystopian Fiction Inspires Young People to Work for the Common Good. Maybe you remember a couple of years ago when books like The Maze Runner, The Hunger Games, Divergent were all pretty popular. They were on our bookshelves and our movie screens just about everywhere you looked. And even though these books aren't as prevalent in 2019, their influence can still be seen in the way teens and young adults act today. Regardless of your personal beliefs, my hope is that you'll see that there's universal value in young people taking a stand for what they believe in, since a politically active society is beneficial for the whole. So I'll quickly cover what a dystopian novel is, just so we're all on the same page. If you do a Google Images search for dystopia, you'll end up with a lot of pictures like this one. And I don't know about you, that does not look like a great place to live. A dystopia is basically the opposite of a perfect world. There's an abuse of power, poor living conditions, and just not a great place to be. As for why dystopian novels are popular, in a word, it's basically because of their relatability. Teens are looking at the world around them, and a lot of them feel like it's one that their elders have mismanaged, used up, polluted, and wrecked. Because of that, they relate to the teen protagonists of these novels, who are also living in pretty messed up societies. So they see a connection there between themselves and the characters, even if it's not quite a one-to-one comparison. Many dystopian novels have been published over the years, but for the purposes of this presentation, I've decided to focus on 3 of them in particular. The first is Uglies, written by Scott Westerfeld and published in 2005. In Uglies, Tally Youngblood is looking forward to when she can become one of the pretties and receive the special surgery to become one. But she later learns that that surgery has ulterior motives. In The Hunger Games, which I'm sure many of us might be familiar with, which was written by Suzanne Collins and published in 2008, Katniss Everdeen takes her sister's place in The Hunger Games, a televised fight to the death between 24 teenagers. And finally, the most recent of these novels, Divergent, written by Veronica Roth and published in 2012, Tris Pryor learns that she is divergent, making her a danger to the faction system that her society is based upon. As you can see, all of these books feature a female protagonist who is 16 years old, and each of these characters defies an oppressive force in some way, whether that's a government, a social norm, or some type of social group. So these teens are being exposed to characters who are similar in age and have similar circumstances, but in addition to that, they're also taking a stand for what they believe in. These characters are creating change in their societies and not sitting idly by. In Uglies, Tally is sent by the government to search out a group of rebels and report back. Instead of doing that, however, she decides to side with these rebels, even though it means she'll never become pretty like she originally wanted to. In The Hunger Games, Katniss loses an ally in battle, but instead of acting heartless and cold as the audience watching the games expects her to, she shows her humanity and honors her fallen friend. Finally, in Divergent, that society has a saying, faction before blood. Despite that, when a conflict arises between Tris's faction and her parents' faction, she chooses to side with her family and defend them. So is it possible that teen readers are being inspired by their favorite characters? We may not have a complete answer, but we can look for evidence in recent examples of teen civic and social activism. The first one you might be most familiar with, the March for Our Lives movement, which is probably the most recent large-scale example of teen civic activism. It was formed by students at the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School after that school experienced a deadly mass shooting. In March 2018, these students led the march in Washington, D.C. with around 800,000 people in attendance. And even though this is a large-scale example, as you can see just from the crowds that were there in D.C. Just about a year ago, this is a large-scale example, but there are also examples of teens creating change on a smaller but no less important scale. Allison, too, thought her school wasn't doing enough to teach students about mental health, so she founded Stamina, Student Alliance for Mental Health Innovation and Action, which brings teens together to talk about mental health. Natalie Hampton experienced bullying in middle school, so she built a mobile app called Sit With Us that allows students to find peers to eat lunch with so they don't have to eat alone. And finally, at a young age, Maria Keller learned that many children didn't have access to books, so she began collecting books and distributing them through hospitals, schools, and nonprofits worldwide. She has collected and donated over 1 million books on her own. So, you might be thinking now, Maggie, this is all great and interesting, but why does it matter? I invite you to think about these questions. How does this affect how we perceive teenage pop culture? Is it more than just silly books or movies for children? What pop culture elements have encouraged us to make a change in the world? Think about the movies you've watched, the books you've read, the music you listen to, all those things. And finally, what can we learn from how these teens have taken a stand in their society? Thank you for your time.